Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Joshua Hoffman, Rabbi at Valley Beth Shalom Synagogue in Encino, California. And as we're all joining in on our Facebook Live learning feed, I welcome you to our homepage at Valley Beth Shalom on Facebook. And if you're tuning in from YouTube, we welcome you to our YouTube page. And we are so happy that you've joined us for all the learning opportunities. And I'm particularly grateful that you're joining me tonight for about an hour of learning in a class that we call Soul Mastery. And Soul Mastery is really text and wisdom that is born out of the Musar tradition. And we also connect it with modernity, and we try to apply it to real life situations. And certainly our present moment is filled with lots of opportunities to question our virtues, to test our virtues, to practice our virtues, even to adjust our behavior in light of what we thought were our virtues, but the intensity of the moment has maybe challenged that, put that into a question of whether we really are capable of fulfilling our best selves as we see ourselves being able to do. So welcome as everybody's joining on. And let me just tell you a little bit, as I'm looking at my phone, I want to join you on Facebook Live as well, so I can get your comments. A question. Hold on a second. Whether we really are capable of it. As I'm looking at my phone, I want to join you. There we go. So great. There are lots of wonderful things happening at Valley Beth Shalom, and I really encourage you to take advantage of the learning, of the worship opportunities, of the service opportunities that we're continuing to provide through our synagogue community as we try to respond to so many in need. And we're so very proud of the many arms of our community that have reached out to help those in need, including some valiant and heroic members that have been coordinating meals to deliver to those in hospitals. In addition to our magnificent food bank, which is assiduously attended to by members of our community, volunteers, to serve a vast number of families. We're giving tens and even hundreds of packages of food out weekly, and it is really, really a vital, not only overflow from the other food pantries in the area, but it's really a vital service that we're providing to the community, for us in the community to be able to provide, and for those in need in the community to be able to gain from our gifts and our support and our care and our love. So if you're moved to participate in that, just go to the vbs.org, VBS at home page, and you'll find lots and lots of opportunities to participate that way as well. In addition to the worship and the learning and the service, there's also really great opportunities for us to gather together. It's really hard to be in person in any shape or form. We might even see each other in person, but we're kind of apprehensive. We don't want to come into contact with people too much, at least certainly in this very precarious time. So how do we do what we need to do so much, which is to connect with each other? And we have lots of opportunities to do that, including the coming weeks. We're going to be gathering just for a social time to celebrate Shabbat with families, especially those who don't have extended families to be able to celebrate Shabbat with in person. This is a great place for us to gather together, and then friends to get to see each other. It's not so easy to coordinate our lives, and even in a time like this when it seems like the busyness of our lives has quieted down. So having said all that, it's just a great place to be, and I'm so glad that you're here with me, and I'm just looking forward to learning with you tonight. So tonight we're going to be discussing the virtue of decisiveness, or choosing wisely. And clearly this is something that can occupy a great amount of our time. It can be even stifling at some times, and there are those that are sometimes paralyzed by the necessity to make choices in their lives. So this is not really about how to address that, but really what goes into making a choice tonight. And when those choices do precipitate, to make sure that you are doing so with the best intention and with as much projection about the possible outcome that can result. So let's take a look at our text. But before we do that, or as we're doing that, I want to just introduce this idea of choices before we do that. So just think about the choices. I think there's a taxonomy here. I think that when we contemplate what goes into making decisions, that's one aspect of the conversation. Then there's this other aspect, which are the decisions themselves. And it's important to first focus on the decisions themselves before we focus, which we're going to spend some time on tonight, on the process of making those decisions. And I think we can begin to consider this in a taxonomy. This is the way that I just at least think about it intellectually, and I hope that you participate in understanding. So you think that there are the choices that are of the mundane, right? What to eat in the morning, what clothes to wear, where to spend our time, what space to occupy, what duties that are already prescribed for us, what are the decisions that we need to make in order to fulfill those duties. Those choices that we make, which are the most frequent of our choices and happen often without any forethought, are the most mundane. And that's one level, taxonomy, mundane choices. Then I would say there's another level, momentary choices. And those are a little bit more unique in that while they're not special, it's not like getting married, it's not like making a decision for a career or making a decision for care for the long-term care for a loved one. Those are really big decisions. Momentary decisions are things that are significant. And it's more than just like, what you're going to buy at the grocery market, but it's decisions of how am I going to eat so that I can live a healthy life? What choices do I need to make so that the food that I do eat, which is a mundane choice, is part of a momentary decision about the way that I'm going to live my life? That's just a food example. A third level and a much more detailed level is long-term consequential choices. These are the kinds of choices that we make that are far reaching, but they have clear and definitive results. In other words, if we make a choice perhaps to get involved in a serious long-term, lifelong relationship, that is a consequential choice. It's a positive choice. It's a beautiful choice. But the consequences of that are not only shared responsibility or sharing your life and being open to somebody having a say or a part in the life and the decisions that you make. And there are consequences to that. But then there's all of the qualitative experiences that happen after a lifelong relationship, whether it's with a partner in life or it's a long-term friend. But the consequential choices that we make about who to associate with, or career choices. How are we going to profess ourselves? What are we going to do to contribute to the society around us? Those are consequential choices. And that to me is a third level of taxonomy. Then there's this ultimate level, right, which is the I call long-term eternal or definitional choices. These are the ones that we identify ourselves to be. And more than identify ourselves in the sense of our bodies and our behavior, we identify our souls. We identify that there's a confluence of intellectual reasoning, of emotional experience, and this kind of transcendent purpose, this sort of reaching for something that is not yet defined, but is bigger than ourselves. That kind of decision making, right? Which is all about virtue. It's all about like qualities of kindness, which are behavioral, but being a kind person is something that one does with the intention of living a life of kindness. And furthermore, you can think about kindness, patience, equanimity, being orderly, having a good sense of separation from one part of yourself and others, which is what one needs to do in order to be present for people in the way that they need to be. All of these kinds of qualities, or last week, as we spoke about, for those who've been joining in this class, cleanliness and the idea of pursuing cleanliness, which is less about our physical experience, but is more about a sense of dignity. Seeing other human beings, seeing the world with a sense of dignity is a long-term definitional choice. It's something that one does in order to kind of create their soul identity. And when you think about this taxonomy of these four levels of choices, I think my seeking suspicion, and I hope you're hearing that as well, is that when you are making choices, Even mundane choices and definitional choices might be going up and down the taxonomy. In other words, taxonomies aren't merely in stage or incremental levels of choice. It's a way for us to understand that there are choices that we make at particular moments or over periods of time in our life, and that making those choices, whether they're momentary or they're explicit, or they are definitional and they are meant to be lifelong in pursuit of the fulfillment of those choices, that there is a taxonomy that exists, but also a qualitative experience. So in other words, having that extra bite of ice cream, we're going to talk about foods tonight, may be a mundane choice, may be a momentary choice. It may even be a long-term consequential choice. Because if you make those one little extra bites over and over again, and your body isn't able to assimilate all that sugar, well, we just start to grow and grow and grow physically, and we're not growing our souls so much. And then there's this last one, this identity, who you are as a person. If you are subject to the impulses of your body, and you feel like you can't make the choices that you would like to make, which are the best choices that you can make. That is where we begin our study tonight. That kind of thinking is what the rabbis of the tradition have identified as the Yetzer Hara. Now, Yetzer Hara sounds, and its opposite, Yetzer HaTov, it sounds like it's a duality. Like there's good behavior and bad behavior. Like in the Garden of Eden, right? The first human beings took the bite of the fruit and they knew good and evil. They knew something and its opposite. And the Yetzer Hara, as an opposite of Yetzer HaTov, sounds like it's something that we should eliminate, because we only want to live with good. And good is what we identify with God. But as we see, as we begin to read our text this evening, not only is that not true, but there's something very fundamental about our humanity that is defined by this Yetzer Hara and Yetzer HaTov. We introduce that subject, and then we introduce what being decisive is, knowing that the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov are at play in making those decisions. So here we go. Charitzut, Musar and Mastery. Hello, friends. It's good to see you tonight. Go ahead and give me a shout out and a thumbs up if you are participating. But let's take a look at our soul mastery text tonight, Charitzut, choosing wisely. Defining the Yetzer Hara. Rabbi Nachman said in Rabbi Shmuel's name, this is coming from, I missed the quotation, it got cut off. It's coming from Bereshit Rabbah. It's coming from one of the rabbinic works from about the 5th to 7th century. Rabbi Nachman said in Rabbi Shmuel's name, behold, it was good, refers to the good desire, or the Yetzer HaTov. In other words, what he's saying, because we don't have the Hebrew, is in the Torah, in the very first chapters of Genesis, when God says, let there be something, God says, it was good. And God saw that it was good. Vayar ki tov. Behold, it was good. And that refers to the Yetzer HaTov. And behold, it was very good, which is the thing, as we describe in a moment, was referring to the evil desire, the Yetzer Hara. In parentheses, we read, it only says very good after man was created with both the good and bad inclinations. In all other cases, it says, and God saw that it was good. I just want to highlight this. I hope you're seeing it. Okay, just highlight that, right? Okay, in other words, from the outset, they're playing with the words. When God creates humanity, God says, Hine Tov Me'od. When God creates a human being, Tov Me'od is an indication to them that the human being was imbued with not only the good impulse, that's Tov, Me'od is the sense of Ra, Yetzer Hara. And I love that, because that in and of itself is an interpretation, a wonderful interpretation, that Me'od, very, something more than is necessary, might be a hint, an indication of what the Yetzer Hara is, right? So then it continues. But then, can the evil desire be very good? tov me'od, right? They're saying, wait a minute, which word modifies which? Tov, I thought me'od is very good, but how could it be very good if it's bad? That would be extraordinary. But without the evil desire, without Yetzer Hara, the rabbis teach, however, no man would build a house, take a wife and beget children. And so said Solomon, or so said King Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. Again, I considered all labor and all excelling in work. That is a man's rivalry with his neighbor. In other words, when we teach a text like this, the human being is endowed with these two natures, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov. And they are in a dynamic with each other. The concept that we eliminated in this last part of the text says, if it didn't exist, nobody would build a house, nobody would procreate, there wouldn't be people out there working and laboring, because it's that impulse that we have to serve ourselves that propels us to make decisions. That is the Yetzer Hara. The challenge that we have for decision making, and the challenge we always have, is whether we let that impulse rule our decisions, so much so that when we would rather make a decision that might benefit us, we succumb to its lulling voice, its lilt, and its timbre to attract us to make a choice that isn't in our best interest. So that's one, right out from the book of Bereshit Rabbah. It says, look, when we understand who the human being is, Tov and Tov Ma'od is exactly what we're dealing with. And that means that we have good and bad built into us. Okay. The goal of this is not for you to become a saint in which the Yetzer Hara doesn't exist. The goal for us in learning like this is to learn how to master the Yetzer Hara, and also to learn how to master the Yetzer HaTov. And we'll continue a little bit more with that tonight. So this comes out of the Noah story. This is after the flood and after they have exited the ark and they're back on dry land. And the first thing that Noah does, which has its own wonderful story for another time, is Noah built an altar to the Lord. And taking of among every clean animal and of every clean bird, he offered burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the pleasing odor, and the Lord said to himself, never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the devisings of man's mind are evil from his youth. Nor will I ever again destroy every living being as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So this is one of those, like, again, fundamental texts from the book of the Bible. And it's important that we pay attention to as we're about to delve into some of the more complicated teachings, which kind of first identify that the human being, even though the human being was created Tov Me'od, and the human being was created B'Tselem Elohim, the human being was created with impulse. And that impulse, according to the rabbis who are trying to understand this, but even the story of the Bible itself says, God recognizes that the human being, from its very fashioning and creation, is Tov Me'od, which means that it has both. So here, since the devisings of man, I highlighted it, is evil from his youth, right? That Ra Minurav is what it says in Hebrew, that kind of concept is actually, I think it's liberating. I think it is not a sense of shame, and it's not a sense of guilt. It's a recognition that the human being has impulses, desires, needs, what it appears to be needs, which may not represent the best interest. It prohibits us. It limits us from us attaining a sense of Kiddusha or B'Tselem Elohim, image of God, holy encounter. That kind of goal, which is what I think ultimately is our goal as human beings and as souls in this existence, is to be connected with what we identify as God, this sort of powerful source of good in the universe. We have to temper our understanding that our impulses may not necessarily help us in accomplishing that goal for all kinds of reasons. So let me stop there for a second. Let me take a look. Anybody has any comments, please feel free to jump in. If you have any comments to share, I would love to hear them before we continue with the Mesilat Yesharim. So glad that you're here. Hello, Doug. Hello, Stephanie. Hello, Mark. Hello, Eliza. Hello, Rabbi Taff, if you're there. Nice that you're checking in. Hello, Laura, and all friends that have checked in. I see your names there. It's good to see you all. Great. So let us continue if we're doing okay with our text. Okay? So this is Mesilat Yesharim, the path of the just. And this is the first chapter. The first chapter of the text is called Watchfulness. Okay? So here he writes, the Holy One, be blessed, has put the human being in a place where the factors which distance one from the blessed God are numerous. Okay, so we can question agency about what it means for God to put the human being under trial, right? Or to create circumstances in which God has created foils or obstacles for the human being to accomplish the sense of closeness, Kiddusha, or B'Tselem Elohim, that it desires. This may be sort of a carryover from what we just read in the book of Noah. If the story of God is that God can't stand humanity with all of its evil and unchecked devisings, and promises Noah not to destroy the earth again, that part of God's compromise is a recognition that man and man's evil or impulsive nature is constantly beset with obstacles, which is either human made or it's God made. Let's just consider for the moment that it's human made. These are the physical lusts, which if a person is drawn after them, behold, she draws away and goes even further from the true good. Thus we see that the human being is truly placed in the midst of a raging battlefield. For all matters of this world, whether for the good or the bad, are trials. Poverty from one side versus wealth from the other. This is, as King Shlomo, or the author of Proverbs, said, lest I be satiated and deny you and say, who is God? Or lest I be poor and steal, as the quotation comes from the book of Proverbs. In other words, it's not that wealth will protect you from the evil impulse. God knows we have so many examples in our world of people that have more access to more wealth than is humanly possible to spend and use in a lifetime. And besides the sort of feelings of loneliness and misery that may amount from that, even a person who enjoys and indulges in everything that this world has to offer, flying to the moon or flying out in space, that denial or recognition that solely seeking self-pleasure in this life denies one's true purpose, which is to be in connection with what we call God, B'Tselem Elohim. Or the converse, right? That someone's poverty is so severe and dire that they can't choose to act humbly or to act responsibly, but feel compelled to steal in order to survive. And knowing that that's a terrible choice that has to be made for a person. And we have sympathy for the person that feels that choice is even a possibility. But the choice is still a choice. And stealing is something that we as a society, as a human civilization, we can't endure, because besides the exemplary models, it breaks down the fundamental recognition that we as selves and individuals have an aspect of divinity in us, a sense of dignity in us, a sense of worth in us. So when we make the choices that we have to make, whether they're from a place of wealth, whether that's material wealth or emotional wealth or spiritual wealth, or it's from a place of poverty, whether that's material impoverishment or it's emotional impoverishment or it's spiritual impoverishment, neither of those alternatives, when we are forced to make choices without that sense of capacity and agency of acting with our Yetzer HaTov, that is the challenge that we must contend with. So let's continue. If he will be a man of valor, says the Ramchal, that's Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, emerging from the battle victorious on all fronts. He will be the Adam HaShalem, the whole and perfect man, who will merit to cling to the Creator and will emerge from this corridor to enter into the palace to enlighten in the light of eternal life. According to the extent that he has conquered his inclination and lust and distanced it from the factors which distance him from the good and exerted himself to cling to God, to that extent will he attain it and rejoice in it. So just going to highlight that, right? That last part here. So what we're talking about here and what Luzzatto is talking about is not necessarily, it's not a destination, just like that taxonomy of choices isn't in stages alone, and they're discrete and specific and only grow in their importance when we grow in the kinds of choices that we make. We're making mundane and important choices all the time. The challenge is to make sure that when we make even mundane choices, they are made in a sense that is being described here, that there's a distance from this thing called the Yetzer Hara, from an impulse that distances one from the good, this battle, raging battle of those distances which draw us down or bring our lusts into our behavior. That is what the Ramchal is warning us against. If you look deeper into the matter, you will see that this world was created for the human's use. Now, I just want to pause. We're going further. This is the first chapter of his book. He is just introducing this whole idea, which eventually is going to create this Musar tradition that we're studying. There's nothing here that you don't know. He says it. That's the first word that he says. But what is being captured here is that recognition that these truths, that this world is our world. It's not a world that God created and therefore set up all these obstacles for us to overcome. And we're just merely trying to overcome the obstacles so we can be in the presence of God. On the contrary, the world exists, one. When the world exists, we and how we act in the world is determined by our behavior, the choices that we make. If you recognize that this is our world to make the most of, and that's environmental, and that is relational, and that is even sort of spiritual or emotional or psychological, that's created for our benefit. But behold, he continues, the human being stands on a great balance. For if she is drawn after the world and distances from her creator, behold, she corrupts herself and corrupts the world with her. The world is ours to master. And therefore, we, as we have spoken about before in other classes, because we have been given this power, it's ours to master. That power that is given within our hands can be used to bring benefit and goodness into the world, but it also can be one that distances, empowers, and subjugates others. We have to be very careful about how we choose. But if she rules over herself and clings to her creator and uses the word only as an aid to serve her creator, then she elevates herself and elevates her world with her. For all creations are elevated when they serve Adam HaShalem, the whole and perfect person who is sanctified with the holiness of the blessed God. So I want to stop right here. Anybody wants to say anything? I'm glad that you're all here. And hello, friends that continue to join us. So I'm pausing for comments, and I'll make some responses. I see a comment there in a second, but let me conclude this section. So far what we've studied is this concept that the human being is endowed with impulse, right? We can look at this from a biological perspective or an anthropological perspective, or we can look at it from a Torah perspective. And the Torah teaches us, just for our purposes tonight, Tov Me'od. Tov Me'od, which is the words that are used to describe the creation of the human being, refer to the fact that we have these impulses in contention with each other. And the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, comes along and says, this contention with these two qualities is like a raging battlefield, right? That's not something that is easily contended. And I think we can all identify with this. I mean, maybe I can identify it more easily. Perhaps I'm just a more flawed human being. I'm going to go out on a limb with all of us tonight. And I'm going to say that maybe you've been in contention with this more than once in your lifetime. If you haven't been like me, which is like every single day. So when we're in contention with this, it's like a raging battlefield. And it's not that you stamp out one in order to defeat it, but how do you create a balance? And the Ramchal is teaching here that creating the balance is when your actions are consistent. Your power for using the world that is as it has been created is created in such a way that your actions, your choices, and your response to the world is something that is God-like, creative, healing, constructive. It is connective. It is a sense of what we call kedusha again, right? This uplift, this transcendent experience. Those are the things that we need to focus on. And the more we focus on them in our lives, the more God-like we become, which is the goal according to the Torah. So I'm stopping for a second. Mark had a wonderful comment, right? He says he's thinking of Tov Me'od, and he's thinking of Bechol Me'odecha. So I would just add an interesting thing. Bechol Me'odecha, by the way, comes from our prayer book when we recite the words of the Shema. And in the middle of those words, in the paragraph that we call the V'ahavta, it says, Bechol levavcha, uvechol nafshecha, uvechol me'odecha. Right? And there he says, when I think of me'od, I think me'odecha. And I want to add that I think it's Rashi who says levavcha is, it's in Hebrew, it's kind of a strange construction. There are two bets there. And that means that there are two, he refers that again to the two natures, this Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hatov. So we love God with both of them. And the same idea that you're adding, right? B'chol me'odecha, with both of our enoughs, both of our more than enoughs, with our greatness, right? That means that we actually have to recognize that we have a fire inside of us. And that fire is sometimes filled with anger and rage. But when we act on that anger and rage, that becomes harmful. And that we need to work on. Any other comments? We're doing okay. All right, let's go back into our text and let's take a peek at now the Cheshbon HaNefesh. This is Menachem Mendel Levin of Satanov, and he is called the Cheshbon HaNefesh, again, 18th century. All your acts should be preceded by deliberation. When you have reached a decision, act without hesitating. Let's read it again. All your acts should be preceded by deliberation. In other words, your choices need meditation. When you have reached a decision, once your meditation has revealed to you what decision you're going to make, act without hesitating. This concept, which is called charitzut, okay, to be charutz, which is to be decisive. Charutz is, you can hear even in the intonation or the articulation, gesticulation of it. It is hard, it's rigid. Haritzut is definitive. But in order to be definitive, you have to deliberate that the definitive statement you are making, choice that you are making, is the choice, hopefully the right one, for the moment, and that there is no other better choice to be made at this particular moment. Now, my qualifications at this particular moment aren't built into the text, but I think that that's where you have to start, because we all have, again, as we've recognized, we all have impulses, and our impulses feel in the moment like we've made the right possible decision. And it's only sometimes in retrospect that we realize that we didn't make the right decision. The more that one pays attention to those moments, the easier it is to enter into what I think the Cheshbon HaNefesh is referring to here, where he says, all your acts should be preceded by deliberation. Right? So now, it's not about whether you should have chicken or turkey for dinner, or if you're a vegetarian, if you should have some delicious quinoa dish, or you should go for some vegetarian Indian food. It's not about that. But there is something that, as we mentioned before, is something that could go into a simple decision like that. If your decision is to keep a healthy diet, well, then the type of cuisine that you eat for a meal is something that you're going to be very considerate about. And if you consider that even more, it has consequential long-term effects. And eating a healthy, balanced diet will ensure that you live as long and hopefully as free of disease as possible, right? You've given yourself the best chances for a long life when you eat a healthy life. And thirdly, it's a qualitative decision. You're saying, I'm a person that cares about what I ingest, what I put into my body, just as much as I care about what I say and what I express. So let's continue. This is a little bit of interpretation from the Musar Pathways book, which we've been studying before. It's by Rabbi Aristone and his students, his writing group that created the book that I've drawn this text from. Decisions are wake-up calls, reminding us that anytime we are confronted with a choice, from the seemingly big ones, like who to marry, to the seemingly trivial ones, like what clothes to wear today, not only the choice, but the way we make the choice will impact others in our lives. Without wakefulness, our Yetzer Hara will be the energy behind the decision, making or action. The focus will be on me. This midah, charitzut, reminds us to view our decisions and actions as alarm clocks, waking us up to the knowledge that how we approach our decision and how we take up our actions with speed, resolution, and with clarity impacts our ability to respond, to have the energy, focus, and time for the others in our lives. In other words, you would have thought that the clothes that you wear really doesn't matter to anybody else. And boy, are we living in a time where I want you to know I dressed up for this class, and you can imagine that I was wearing something a little bit more casual before this class. And I suppose I could have come on screen because we're just talking, right? But there's something about being deliberate and conscious about wearing a shirt that looks at least semi-presentable to you, so that not only are you not focusing on what I'm wearing, but also you see that I care about the text that we're learning and that it deserves to be dressed appropriately. That's true about every decision that we make. It's about how you conduct yourself when you're driving on the road, or how you conduct yourself when you're in the marketplace and you're interacting with people. That should happen one day soon and in plentiful bounteous opportunities for us to do this. That the choices that we make have impact on others, even if we don't think that that's the case. In fact, some of us may willfully withdraw into our own personal space, self-isolate without having to self-isolate because we don't want to feel the critique or judgment of others. This is the exact opposite. It's a radical re-understanding of the choices that we make. It's actually an empowering move. It says the choices that you make affect others. Don't worry about the judgment of others, but the choices that you make can affect others. Imagine if the choices that you make with such thoughtfulness and deliberation and certainty can create the kinds of consequences that you hoped for, that you expected. And when they don't, that you have enough certainty and enough conscious deliberation that went into your decision making so that you can make the readjustment. That's the work that we're doing right now. So let's continue on a little bit. Any comments? Everybody's doing okay. Yofi. So Rabbi Aristone teaches, as he continues, right? To act without appropriate forethought is often to allow the Yetzer Hara to preclude the possibility of acting with the other in mind. So let's just identify that, right? When you make a decision, maybe we'll call it an impulsive act. When you make that kind of act, you are doing so without the other in mind. And sometimes you think, like, if you're a parent and you have to respond to a child's behavior and you have to impulsively respond, you're thinking that that person's behavior doesn't deserve your forethought. Or maybe it's an emergency situation. God forbid, there's danger. You don't think about whether it's a good decision or not to help this person in need. More often than not, almost all the time, we make the decision to jump in and help, sometimes even putting our own lives at risk. That capacity that we have as human beings in those extreme circumstances, can be translated to even more mundane activity. And to know that when we act impulsively, we're not acting with the other in mind. Just think about any time that you get angry. Anger and your response to anger in that moment, are you really thinking about the other in that moment? Or are you thinking about yourself? So let's continue. However, to hesitate to act after appropriate forethought is often to allow the Yetzer Hara to impede acting with the other in mind. In other words, you could be so overwhelmed and overcome with the indecisiveness. I don't know. Should I do it? What's the right thing to do? On the one hand, on the other hand, and Lord knows the Jewish people are very indecisive about things, or at least we have lots of good hand gestures to deal with our indecisiveness. This is to say that if you allow that equivocation to take place, if you allow that thought process to take place in which you weigh out different options and wonder what the best choice is too much, then you allow what is called the Yetzer Hara to enter into that. We call that procrastination, right? Procrastination, thinking before the act. Procrastination is both a tool of the Yetzer Hara and a consequence of the action of the Yetzer Hara. Decisiveness narrows the field in which the Yetzer Hara has to do its work. Let's continue on. In the case of Haritzut, we have to engage in an appropriate process of deliberation, aided by other midot such as savlanut or patience, seder, which is order, menuchat hanefesh, which is equanimity, and others. The decision made will define the internal space allocated for oneself and allocated for another. Internal space allocated for oneself and allocated for another. Haritzut comes into play regarding the time we take to implement this decision. You know when you make a good decision. You know when good decision making takes place in your life about anything. It's putting pros and cons on a chart. It's thinking about it. It's even reaching a decision and then backing away once you play out the consequences of that decision. That kind of space that you create is an internal space. And when we talk about space in Judaism, that's always an opportunity for Kiddusha, holiness, to enter into the space. What does it mean to be holy? It means to create space, to separate out things and allow space that is created to be filled with something that is sacred, sacred encounter, holiness, the Yetzer HaTov. The more that you create that internal space in your decision making, the more that you're considering another, that is what it means to be decisive, because you know that when you make that decision, you've done that process beforehand. If you have any comments or questions, go ahead and start typing them in. We're going to finish this text and then I'll stop. The assumption is that the more time that passes before a decision is implemented will be more time for the Yetzer Hara to push beyond its legitimate borders and reduce the space for the other. This midah, this quality of decisiveness, recognizes the innate strength of the Yetzer Hara as opposed to the fragility of the Yetzer HaTov, and identifies time as the ally of the former as opposed to the latter. Now, I loved including this, and there was lots. This is just, highlights of the teaching. This idea that the Yetzer Hara is strong and the Yetzer HaTov is fragile is something that I think we all contend with. We know that when we feel like we have been responding to our Yetzer Hara, it is because our Yetzer HaTov is fragile or weak. I like fragile much better, because weak implies a sense of inability to respond. But fragile says this is a precious gift that we also possess. And the Yetzer Hara is so powerful. If you want to talk about balance, it's not that the Yetzer HaTov is going to extinguish the Yetzer Hara. It's more often than not our fear that the Yetzer Hara is going to extinguish the Yetzer HaTov. But the only way to do that, accomplish that, is to increase the strength of the Yetzer HaTov, to minimize the fragility of the Yetzer HaTov in order to combat or respond to the impulses of the Yetzer Hara. So far, I'm not seeing any comments. So go ahead. We're just anything to add, any questions, I'm happy to take them. When we procrastinate, we must ask, Who is the other or others which are impacted by this decision? What am I afraid of when I hold back from acting on this decision? What are the ways that this decision allows me to take responsibility for the burden of the other? What sources of joy do I choke off when I turn from the future of the other to the present of myself? What great questions to contemplate as we're thinking about this quality, right? When you are deliberating, what am I afraid of? What are the ways that this decision allows me to take responsibility? What sources of joy am I limiting myself from experiencing when I turn from somebody else's future in which we feel so much joy from reaction and response from the other, and we're only focused on ourselves? These are the qualities to contemplate and think about as we're discussing this concept of charitzut, of being thoughtful in our decision making. So let's play a what would you do? So in order to do the what would you do, if you've been with me in classes before, just take a moment, and all of those who are joining us for the first time, and I welcome you, we just take a moment. This is sort of a slightly meditative moment. It's impossible to do in a class format like this, but it's really important when you're talking about Musar learning and soul mastery to be able to locate your soul space. And you do that by breathing and beginning to quiet down the mind, quiet down the heart. So take a deep breath in, put your hands on your knees if you're comfortable. In through the nose if you're able, and out through the mouth. Breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. Try to begin slowly erasing the thoughts that you've been ruminating on through the learning, which hopefully you will return to very quickly, but just for the moment to let it go. And let go of some of the stress of your day and all of the decision making that went into a moment just like this, including the decision to stay online and watch this for a little bit. Deep breath in and focus on those choices, letting go of any frustration or disappointment in the choices that you made and wish you had made different choices, or being proud and joyful that the choices that you made were so good. In and out. One or two more deep breaths. Now focusing on what you think it takes to make a deliberation in order to be decisive in the choice that you're about to make, whether it's a mundane choice, a momentary choice, or it's something more profound like a life choice. So what would you do? Ellen is at dinner with a few friends who have been involved in a deep discussion. It comes time for dessert, and there are two things on the menu that interest her: a high-calorie cookie with ice cream and a low-calorie sugar-free eclair. You already know where this is going. Ellen can't decide between the two. Oh, what a decision. On the one hand, she loves cookies and ice cream. And on the other hand, she loves eclairs and thinks she could do without the sugar rush. Ellen likes the idea of healthy eating, but she is easily tempted by good desserts. She decides to listen to what others are ordering and then decide. When her friend Rita orders the cookie, Ellen says, "That's my other choice." To which Rita responds, "It sounds great. Why don't you get it?" Ellen then thinks to herself, she really wants me to get that one too, And so she also orders the cookie. As the waitress walks away, Ellen continues to ponder her decision, but she becomes distracted from the conversation. Because she did not stick to her original commitment to be a healthy eater, she winds up, by the way, I think that was judgment. She winds up wasting time in her decision making. By the time she gets clear on her final decision and finds a waitress to change her order, her friends have finished what was otherwise a meaningful conversation. She missed out on being present with them and participating in the conversation. See, you would have thought that this was about choosing the cookie or the eclair, but it's really not about that at all, right? It's about the distraction. It's about the confusion that we experience when we are too deliberative, or we're not certain of a choice that we're yet to make. And if you were Ellen and you were sitting next to her and she shared this story with you, what would you do? What would you say to her? I suppose that your answer would begin with either, some kind of like calming statement. Oh, you made this choice. It's not so bad. Next time you'll do it differently. Or maybe it's another one to say, you've really, you really recognize that you missed out on a conversation. So what was it that caused you so much anxiety in your choice? And maybe like helping you to understand that anxiety is something that's worth exploring, so that when the choice, just like this one, emerges sometime in probably the very near future, the deliberation or understanding of what the consequences of her decisions are or would be is what she really grapples with. Or thirdly, right, you say to Ellen, thank you very much for studying this text with me. You say to Ellen that your deliberation about the cookie and the eclair is based on a set of really important concepts. It's why I bristled at the healthy eating statement. I'm not so sure that not having a cookie and ice cream is unhealthy, but I am sure that if you are choosing to be a healthy eater, if that's your long-term, definitional, virtue-based decision, then whether you eat the chocolate chip cookie and the ice cream or you eat the eclair, your decision will be consistent with that mindset. Because I really think that a cookie and ice cream can be healthy. Too much ice cream and too much cookies may not be healthy. And a sugar-free eclair, I have my doubts. But I think the idea is that we can enjoy food with its sweetness, even if it isn't made with ingredients that might cause us long-term physical harm. And we can take that into consideration as well. Ultimately, what would you do? So you're not only Ellen's friend, but also put yourself in the place of Ellen, right? What would you do? How would you make a decision? How would you choose to respond to a moment like that? And once you make that decision, was it a deliberate act or was it an impulsive act? Was it something that was good for yourself, or was it the consequence of a series of decisions, a process of making decisions that helped you see that your choice is part of the Yetzer HaTov, really about connecting and growing your soul? I want to conclude, and we have to conclude just a couple minutes early tonight, with this wonderful Hasidic teaching. This is a really great teaching about this reality of Yetzer Hara and Yetzer HaTov, and also about being decisive. So a man told his grandson, terrible fight is going on inside me, a fight between two wolves. One is evil and represents hate, anger, arrogance, intolerance, and superiority. The other is good and represents joy, peace, love, tolerance, understanding, humility, kindness, empathy, generosity, and compassion. This same fight is going on inside of you, inside every other person too. The grandson then asked, which wolf will win? And the grandfather or the old man replied simply, whichever one you feed. Decisiveness is based in that principle of whichever impulse you feed. So when you're making choices, can they be choices that are more consistent with what you've defined as the Yetzer HaTov, with all of these wonderful qualities that are expressed here: joy and peace, love, tolerance, understanding, humility, etc.? Or are your choices, even if they feel satisfactory to the moment, they really do represent hate and anger or arrogance or intolerance? And I think you understand this well, but just to reiterate, there are sometimes choices that feel really good, but they're expressed with some of these emotions: hate, anger, arrogance, intolerance. And you think that, well, maybe there's a conflict. There really is no conflict, because any decision that promotes a sense of arrogance or a sense of superiority or a sense of judgment and intolerance, sense which separates you from another, that is the Yetzer Hara. operating with all of its strength and making your Yetzer Tov more and more fragile because it feels, although it isn't true, harder to do the right thing when that pressure is so great. So I hope that as we take this text and takes what we've been learning tonight, that you'll be able to think a little bit more about your decisiveness. Just to sort of like review, we've studied orderliness, we've studied separation, we've studied equanimity, we've studied patience, we've studied cleanliness, we've studied, and now tonight we've studied decisiveness. These courses are all part of this wonderful text tradition called Musar. And in particular, the virtues, the midot that we've been focusing on are part of a whole system. There's 18 in the system that I've been trained to teach. And I think that that's a wonderful way to begin practicing this work. So I leave tonight with the invitation to join a smaller class, because this work is wonderful to teach it and to share the big ideas and to explore the text and to do so in a presentational format. But it's not softer learning. It's actually the most difficult learning that you can acquire, because it's the kind of learning that you have to internalize and you have to practice and you have to learn from the pushes and pulls, the challenges of your practice. And only through that you will grow, just like anything that you practice. Some people are natural at things in life, but even if you look behind those great athletes or those great thinkers or those great teachers or those great doctors or great scientists, and it seems so easy for them to create and to innovate and to discover, there's a tireless, hardworking individual soul. And I would be willing to bet, that's my bet, and you can take me up on the bet, that behind those people who are working so very hard, they know that they're not just doing the work to satisfy their own personal needs, but they're doing it because they know that their work is something that will benefit either their family or their community or the world around them. So with that in mind, I hope that you all have a great week. I hope that your choices bring you to wonderful moments in which your choices really do embrace the other and really reflect your Yetzer Tov. And I look forward to continuing to explore what were your experiences in the future. Have a great week. Thanks for learning with me.